Such accordingly was the course which these Persians took. As for the Greeks upon the king's side, while most of them played the coward purposely, the Boeotians, on the contrary, had a long struggle with the Athenians. Those of the Thebans who were attached to the Medes displayed especially no little zeal. Far from playing the coward, they fought with such fury that 300 of the best and bravest among them were slain by the Athenians in this passage of arms. But at last they too were routed and fled away, not, however, in the same direction as the Persians and the crowd of allies, who, having taken no part in the battle, ran off without striking a blow, but to the city of Thebes. To me it shows very clearly how completely the rest of the barbarians were dependent upon the Persian troops, that here they all fled at once, without ever coming to blows with the enemy, merely because they saw the Persians running away. And so it came to pass that the whole army took to flight, except only the horse, both Persian and Boeotian. These did good service to the flying footmen by advancing close to the enemy and separating between the Greeks and their own fugitives. The victors, however, pressed on, pursuing and slaying the remnant of the king's army. Meantime, while the flight continued, tidings reached the Greeks who were drawn up round the Heraeum, and so were absent from the battle, that the fight was begun, and that Pausanias was gaining the victory. Hearing this, they rushed forward without any order, the Corinthians taking the upper road across the skirts of Kithaeron and the hills which led straight to the temple of Demeter, while the Megarians and Phliasians followed the level route through the plain. These last had almost reached the enemy when the Theban horse espied them, and observing their disarray, dispatched against them the squadron of which Asopodorus, the son of Timander, was captain. Asopodorus charged them with such effect that he left 600 of their number dead upon the plain, and pursuing the rest, compelled them to seek shelter in Kithaeron. So these men perished without honour. The Persians and the multitude with them, who fled to the wooden fortress, were able to ascend into the towers before the Lacedaemonians came up. Thus placed, they proceeded to strengthen the defences as well as they could, and when the Lacedaemonians arrived, a sharp fight took place at the rampart. So long as the Athenians were away, the barbarians kept off their assailants and had much the best of the combat, since the Lacedaemonians were unskilled in the attack of walled places. But on the arrival of the Athenians, a more violent assault was made, and the wall was for a long time attacked with fury. In the end, the valour of the Athenians and their perseverance prevailed. They gained the top of the wall, and breaking a breach through it, enabled the Greeks to pour in. The first to enter here were the Tegeans, and they it was who plundered the tent of Mardonius, where, among other booty, they found the manger from which his horses ate, all made of solid brass, and well worth looking at. This manger was given by the Tegeans to the temple of Athena Alia, while the remainder of their booty was brought into the common stock of the Greeks. As soon as the wall was broken down, the barbarians no longer kept together in any array, nor was there one among them who thought of making further resistance. In good truth, they were all half dead with fright, huddled as so many thousands were into so narrow and confined a space. With such tameness did they submit to be slaughtered by the Greeks, that of the 300,000 men who composed the army, omitting the 40,000 by whom Artabazus was accompanied in his flight, no more than 3,000 outlived the battle. Of the Lacedaemonians from Sparta, there perished in this combat 91, of the Tegeans 16, of the Athenians 52. On the side of the barbarians, the greatest courage was manifested among the foot soldiers by the Persians, among the horse by the Sacae, while Mardonius himself as a man bore off the palm from the rest. Among the Greeks, the Athenians and the Tegeans fought well, but the prowess shown by the Lacedaemonians was beyond either. Of this I have but one proof to offer, since all the three nations overthrew the force opposed to them, and that is, that the Lacedaemonians fought and conquered the best troops. The bravest man by far on that day was, in my judgment, Aristodemus, the same who alone escaped from the slaughter of the 300 at Thermopylae, and who on that account had endured disgrace and reproach. Next to him were Posidonius, Philocleon, and Amompharetus, the Spartan. The Spartans, however, who took part in the fight, when the question of who had distinguished himself most came to be talked over among them, decided that Aristodemus, who, on account of the blame which attached to him, had manifestly courted death, and had therefore left his place in the line and behaved like a madman, had done, of a truth, very notable deeds, but that Posidonius, who with no such desire to lose his life had quitted himself no less gallantly, was by so much a braver man than he. Perchance, however, it was envy that made them speak after this sort. Of those whom I've named above as slain in this battle, all, save and except Aristodemus, received public honours. Aristodemus alone had no honours, because he courted death for the reason which I've mentioned. These, then, were the most distinguished of those who fought at Plataea. As for Callicrates, the most beautiful man, not among the Spartans only, but in the whole Greek camp, he was not killed in the battle, for it was while Pausanias was still consulting the victims that as he sat in his proper place in the line, an arrow struck him on the side. While his comrades advanced to the fight, he was borne out of the ranks, very loath to die, as he showed by the words which he addressed to Aramnestus, one of the Plataeans. "I grieve," said he, "not because I have to die for my country, but because I have not lifted my arm against the enemy, nor done any deed worthy of me, much as I have desired to achieve something." The Athenian who is said to have distinguished himself the most was Sophones, the son of Eutychides, of the Decalion canton. The men of this canton, once upon a time, did a deed which, as the Athenians themselves confess, has ever since been serviceable to them. When the Tindaridae, in days of yore, invaded Attica with a mighty army to recover Helen, and, not being able to find out whither she had been carried, desolated the cantons, at this time, they say, the Decalions, or Decalus himself, according to some, displeased at the rudeness of Theseus, and fearing that the whole territory would suffer, discovered everything to the enemy, and even showed them the way to Aphidne, which Titychus, a native of the place, betrayed into their hands. As a reward for this action, Sparta has always, from that time to the present, allowed the Decalions to be free from all dues, and to have seats of honour at their festivals, and hence, too, in the war which took place many years after these events between the Peloponnesians and the Athenians, the Lacedaemonians, while they lay waste all the rest of Attica, spared the lands of the Decalions. Of this canton was Sophones the Athenian, who most distinguished himself in the battle. Two stories are told concerning him. According to the one, he wore an iron anchor fastened to the belt which secured his breastplate by a brazen chain, and this, when he came near the enemy, he threw out, to the intent that when they made their charge it might be impossible for him to be driven from his post. As soon, however, as the enemy fled, his wont was to take up his anchor and join the pursuit. Such, then, is one of the said stories. The other, which is contradictory to the first, relates that Sophones, instead of having an iron anchor fastened to his breastplate, bore the device of an anchor upon his shield, which he never allowed to rest, but made to run round continually. Another glorious deed was likewise performed by this same Sophones. At the time when the Athenians were laying siege to Aegina, he took up the challenge of Eurybates the Argive, a winner of the pentathlum, and slew him. The fate of Sophones in after times was the following. He was leader of an Athenian army in conjunction with Leagrus, the son of Glaucon, and in a battle with the Edonians near Datum, about the gold mines there, he was slain, after displaying uncommon bravery. As soon as the Greeks at Plataea had overthrown the barbarians, a woman came over to them from the enemy. She was one of the concubines of Pharandates, the son of Thyaspes, a Persian. And when she heard that the Persians were all slain, and that the Greeks had carried the day, forthwith she adorned herself and her maids with many golden ornaments, and with the bravest of the apparel that she had brought with her, and alighting from her litter, came forward to the Lacedaemonians ere the work of slaughter was well over. When she saw that all the orders were given by Pausanias, with whose name and country she was well acquainted, as she had oftentimes heard tell of them, she knew who he must be. Wherefore she embraced his knees, and said, O King of Sparta, save thy suppliant from the slavery that awaits the captive. Already I am beholden to thee for one service, the slaughter of these men, wretches who had no regard either for gods or angels. I am by birth a Coan, the daughter of Herodotus, the son of Actagoras. The Persians seized me by force in Kos, and kept me against my will. Lady, answered Pausanias, fear nothing. As a suppliant thou art safe, and still more if thou hast spoken truth, and Herodotus of Kos is thy father, for he's bound to me by closer ties of friendship than any other man in those regions. When he had thus spoken, Pausanias placed the woman in the charge of some of the ephors who were present, and afterwards sent her to Aegina, whither she had a desire to go. About the time of this woman's coming, the Mantineans arrived upon the field, and found that all was over, and that it was too late to take any part in the battle. Greatly distressed hereat, they declared themselves to deserve a fine as laggards, after which, learning that a portion of the Medes had fled away under Artabazus, they were anxious to go after them as far as Thessaly. The Lacedaemonians, however, wouldn't suffer the pursuit, so they returned again to their own land, and sent the leaders of their army into banishment. Soon after, the Mantineans, the Eleans, likewise arrived, and showed the same sorrow, after which they too returned home and banished their leaders. But enough concerning these nations. There was a man at Plataea among the troops of the Aeginetans, whose name was Lampon. He was the son of Pythias, and a person of the first rank among his countrymen. Now this Lampon went about the same time to Pausanias, and counselled him to do a deed of exceeding wickedness. Son of Cleombrotus, he said very earnestly, what thou hast already done is passing great and glorious. By the favour of heaven thou hast saved Greece, and gained a renown beyond all the Greeks of whom we have any knowledge. Now then, so finish thy work, that thine own fame may be increased thereby, and that henceforth barbarians may fear to commit outrages on the Grecians. When Leonidas was slain at Thermopylae, Xerxes and Mardonius commanded that he should be beheaded and crucified. Do thou the like at this time by Mardonius, and thou wilt have glory in Sparta, and likewise through the whole of Greece. For by hanging him upon a cross thou wilt avenge Leonidas, who was thy father's brother. Thus spake Lampon, thinking to please Pausanias. But Pausanias answered him, My Aeginetan friend, for thy foresight and thy friendliness I am much beholden to thee. But the counsel which thou hast offered is not good. First hast thou lifted me up to the skies by the praise of my country and my achievement, and then thou hast cast me down to the ground, by bidding me maltreat the dead, and saying that thus I shall raise myself in men's esteem. Such doings befit barbarians rather than Greeks, and even in barbarians we detest them. On such terms, then, I couldn't wish to please the Aeginetans, nor those who think as they think. Enough for me to gain the approval of my own countrymen by righteous deeds as well as by righteous words. Leonidas, whom thou wouldst have me avenge, is, I maintain, abundantly avenged already. Surely the countless lives here taken are enough to avenge not him only, but all those who fell at Thermopylae. Come not thou before me again with such a speech, nor with such counsel, and thank my forbearance that thou art not now punished. Then Lampon, having received this answer, departed and went his way. After this, Pausanias caused proclamation to be made, that no one should lay hands on the booty, but that the Helots should gather it and bring it all to one place. So the Helots went and spread themselves through the camp, wherein were found many tents, richly adorned with furniture of gold and silver, many couches covered with plates of the same, and many golden bowls, goblets, and other drinking vessels. On the carriages were bags containing silver and golden kettles, and the bodies of the slain furnished bracelets and chains and scimitars with golden ornaments, not to mention embroidered apparel, of which no one made any account. The Helots at this time stole many things of much value, which they sold in after times to the Aeginetans. However, they brought in likewise no small quantity, chiefly such things as it wasn't possible for them to hide, and this was the beginning of the great wealth of the Aeginetans, who bought the gold of the Helots as if it had been mere brass. When all the booty had been brought together, 1/10 of the whole was set apart for the Delphian god, and hence was made the golden tripod which stands on the bronze serpent with the 3 heads, quite close to the altar. Portions were also set apart for the gods of Olympia and of the Isthmus, from which were made in the one case a bronze Zeus 10 cubits high, and in the other a bronze Poseidon of 7 cubits. After this the rest of the spoil was divided among the soldiers, each of whom received less or more according to his deserts. And in this way was a distribution made of the Persian concubines, of the gold, the silver, the beasts of burthen, and all the other valuables. What special gifts were presented to those who had most distinguished themselves in the battle I don't find mentioned by anyone, but I should suppose that they must have had some gifts beyond the others. As for Pausanias, the portion which was set apart for him consisted of 10 specimens of each kind of thing, women, horses, talents, camels, or whatever else there was in the spoil. It said that the following circumstance happened likewise at this time. Xerxes, when he fled away out of Greece, left his war tent with Mardonius. When Pausanias therefore saw the tent with its adornments of gold and silver, and its hangings of divers colours, he gave commandment to the bakers and to the cooks to make him ready a banquet in such fashion as was their wont for Mardonius. Then they made ready as they were bidden, and Pausanias, beholding the couches of gold and silver daintily decked out with their rich covertures, and the tables of gold and silver laid, and the feast itself prepared with all magnificence, was astonished at the good things which were set before him, and being in a pleasant mood, gave commandment to his own followers to make ready a Spartan supper. When the suppers were both served, and it was apparent how vast a difference lay between the two, Pausanias laughed, and sent his servants to call to him the Greek generals. On their coming he pointed to the 2 boards, and said, I sent for you, O Greeks, to show you the folly of this Median captain, who, when he enjoyed such fare as this, must needs come here to rob us of our penury. Such, it is said, were the words of Pausanias to the Grecian generals. During many years afterwards, the Plataeans used often to find upon the field of battle concealed treasures of gold and silver and other valuables. More recently they likewise made discovery of the following. The flesh having all fallen away from the bodies of the dead, and their bones having been gathered together into one place, the Plataeans found a skull without any seam, made entirely of a single bone, likewise a jaw, both the upper bone and the other, wherein all the teeth, front and back, were joined together and made of one bone. Also the skeleton of a man not less than 5 cubits in height. The body of Mardonius disappeared the day after the battle, but who it was that stole it away I can't say with certainty. I've heard tell of a number of persons, and those too of many different nations, who are said to have given him burial, and I know that many have received large sums on this score from Atantes, the son of Mardonius, but I can't discover with any certainty which of them it was who really took the body away and buried it. Among others, Dionysiophanes, an Ephesian, is rumoured to have been the actual person. The Greeks, after sharing the booty upon the field of Plataea, proceeded to bury their own dead, each nation apart from the rest. The Lacedaemonians made 3 graves. In one they buried their youths, among whom were Posidonius, Amompharetus, Philocyon, and Callicrates. In another the rest of the Spartans, and in the third the Helots. Such was their mode of burial. The Tegeans buried all their dead in a single grave, as likewise did the Athenians theirs, and the Megarians and Phliasians those who were slain by the horse. These graves, then, had bodies buried in them. As for the other tombs which are to be seen at Plataea, they were raised, as I understand, by the Greeks whose troops took no part in the battle, and who, being ashamed of themselves, erected empty barrows upon the field, to obtain credit with those who should come after them. Among others, the Aeginetans have a grave there which goes by their name, but which I learn was made 10 years later by Cleades, the son of Autochidus, a Plataean, at the request of the Aeginetans, whose agent he was. After the Greeks had buried their dead at Plataea, they presently held a council, whereat it was resolved to make war upon Thebes, and to require that those who had joined the Medes should be delivered into their hands. 2 men who had been the chief leaders on the occasion were especially named, to wit, Timagenes and Artagenas. If the Thebans should refuse to give these men up, it was determined to lay siege to their city, and never stir from before it till it should surrender. After this resolve, the army marched upon Thebes, and having demanded the men, and been refused, began the siege, laying waste the country all around, and making assaults upon the wall in divers places. When 20 days were gone by, and the violence of the Greeks didn't slacken, Timagenes thus bespake his countrymen: Ye men of Thebes, since the Greeks have so decreed that they will never desist from the siege till either they take Thebes or we are delivered to them, we would not that the land of Boeotia should suffer any longer on our behalf. If it be money that they in truth desire, and their demand of us be no more than a pretext, let money from the treasury of the state be given them. For the state, and not we alone, embraced the cause of the Medes. If, however, they really want our persons, and on that account press this siege, we are ready to be delivered to them, and to stand our trial. The Thebans thought this offer very right and seasonable, wherefore they dispatched a herald without any delay to Pausanias, and told him they were willing to deliver up the men. As soon as an agreement had been concluded upon these terms, Artagenas made his escape from the city. His sons, however, were surrendered in his place. But Pausanias refused to hold them guilty, since children, he said, could have had no part in such an offence. The rest of those whom the Thebans gave up had expected to obtain a trial, and in that case their trust was to escape by means of bribery. But Pausanias, afraid of this, dismissed at once the whole army of allies, and took the men with him to Corinth, where he slew them all. Such were the events which happened at Plataea and at Thebes. Artabazus, the son of Pharnaces, who fled away from Plataea, was soon far sped on his journey. When he reached Thessaly, the inhabitants received him hospitably, and made inquiries of him concerning the rest of the army, since they were still altogether ignorant of what had taken place at Plataea. Whereupon the Persian, knowing well that if he told them the truth he would run great risk of perishing himself, together with his whole army, for if the facts were once blazoned abroad, all who learnt them would be sure to fall upon him. The Persian, I say, considering this, as he had before kept all secret from the Phocians, so now answered the Thessalians after the following fashion: I myself, Thessalians, am hastening, as you see, into Thrace, and I'm fain to use all possible dispatch, as I'm sent with this force on special business from the main army. Mardonius with his host are close behind me, and may be looked for shortly. When he comes, receive him as ye have received me, and show him every kindness. Be sure ye will never hereafter regret it, if ye so do. With these words he took his departure, and marched his troops at their best speed through Thessaly and Macedon straight upon Thrace, following the inland route, which was the shortest and, in good truth, using all possible dispatch. He himself succeeded in reaching Byzantium, but a great part of his army perished upon the road, many being cut to pieces by the Thracians, and others dying from hunger and excess of toil. From Byzantium, Artabazus set sail and crossed the strait, returning into Asia in the manner which has been here described. On the same day that the blow was struck at Plataea, another defeat befell the Persians at Mycale in Ionia. While the Greek fleet under Leontychides, the Lacedaemonian, was still lying inactive at Delos, there arrived at that place an embassy from Samos, consisting of 3 men, Lampon the son of Thrasycles, Athenagoras the son of Archestratidas, and Hegesistratus the son of Aristagoras. The Samians had sent them secretly, concealing their departure both from the Persians and from their own tyrant Theomista, the son of Androdamus, whom the Persians had made ruler of Samos. When the ambassadors came before the Greek captains, Hegesistratus took the word and urged them with many and various arguments, saying that the Ionians only needed to see them arrive in order to revolt from the Persians, and that the Persians would never abide their coming, or, if they did, it would be to offer them the finest booty that they could anywhere expect to gain, while at the same time he made appeal to the gods of their common worship, and besought them to deliver from bondage a Grecian race, and withal to drive back the barbarians. This, he said, might very easily be done, for the Persian ships were bad sailors, and far from a match for theirs, adding moreover that if there was any suspicion lest the Samians intended to deal treacherously, they were themselves ready to become hostages and to return on board the ships of their allies to Asia. When the Samian stranger continued importunately beseeching him, Leontychides, either because he wanted an omen, or by a mere chance, as God guided him, asked the man, "Samian stranger, prithee tell me thy name." "Hegesistratus, army leader," answered the other, and might have said more, but Leontychides stopped him by exclaiming, "I accept, O Samian, the omen which thy name affords. Only before thou goest back, swear to us, thyself and thy brother envoys, that the Samians will indeed be our warm friends and allies." No sooner had he thus spoken than he proceeded to hurry forward the business. The Samians pledged their faith upon the spot, and oaths of alliance were exchanged between them and the Greeks. This done, 2 of the ambassadors forthwith sailed away. As for Hegesistratus, Leontychides kept him to accompany his own fleet, for he considered his name to be a good omen. The Greeks abode where they were that day, and on the morrow sacrificed, and found the victims favourable. Their soothsayer was Deiphonus, the son of Evenius, a man of Apollonia, the Apollonia which lies upon the Ionian Gulf. A strange thing happened to this man's father Evenius. The Apolloniates have a flock of sheep sacred to the sun. During the daytime these sheep graze along the banks of the river which flows from Mount Lacmon through their territory and empties itself into the sea by the port of Auricus, while at night they are guarded by the richest and noblest of the citizens, who are chosen to serve the office and who keep the watch each for 1 year. Now the Apolloniates set great store by these sheep, on account of an oracle which they received concerning them. The place where they are folded at night is a cavern, a long way from the town. Here it happened that Evenius, when he was chosen to keep the watch, by some accident fell asleep upon his guard, and while he slept the cave was entered by wolves, which destroyed some 60 of the flock under his care. Evenius, when he woke and found what had occurred, kept silence about it, and told no one, for he thought to buy other sheep and put them in the place of the slain. But the matter came to the ears of the Apolloniates, who forthwith brought Evenius to trial, and condemned him to lose his eyes, because he had gone to sleep upon his post. Now when Evenius was blinded, straightway the sheep had no young, and the land ceased to bear its wonted harvests. Then the Apolloniates sent to Dodona and to Delphi, and asked the prophets what had caused the woes which so afflicted them. The answer which they received was this: the woes were come for Evenius, the guardian of the sacred sheep, whom the Apolloniates had wrongfully deprived of sight. They, the gods, had themselves sent the wolves, nor would they ever cease to exact vengeance for Evenius, till the Apolloniates made him whatever atonement he liked to ask. When this was paid, they would likewise give him a gift, which would make many men call him blessed. Such was the tenor of the prophecies. The Apolloniates kept them close, but charged some of their citizens to go and make terms with Evenius, and these men managed the business for them in the way which I will now describe. They found Evenius sitting upon a bench, and approaching him they sat down by his side and began to talk. At first they spoke of quite other matters, but in the end they mentioned his misfortune, and offered him their condolence. Having thus beguiled him, at last they put the question: what atonement would he desire if the Apolloniates were willing to make him satisfaction for the wrong which they had done to him? Hereupon Evenius, who hadn't heard of the oracle, made answer: if I were given the lands of this man and that, here he named the two men whom he knew to have the finest farms in Apollonia, and likewise the house of this other, and here he mentioned the house which he knew to be the handsomest in the town, I would, when master of these, be quite content, and my wrath would cease altogether. As soon as Evenius had thus spoken, the men who sat by him rejoined: Evenius, the Apolloniates give thee the atonement which thou hast desired, according to the bidding of the oracles. Then Evenius understood the whole matter, and was enraged that they had deceived him so. But the Apolloniates bought the farms from their owners, and gave Evenius what he had chosen. After this was done, straightway Evenius had the gift of prophecy, insomuch that he became a famous man in Greece. Deiphones, the son of this Evenius, had accompanied the Corinthians, and was soothsayer, as I said before, to the Greek armament. One account, however, which I have heard, declares that he was not really the son of this man, but only took the name, and then went about Greece and let out his services for hire. The Greeks, as soon as the victims were favourable, put to sea and sailed across from Delos to Samos. Arriving off Calliope, a place upon the Samian coast, they brought the fleet to an anchor near the temple of Hera, which stands there, and prepared to engage the Persians by sea. These latter, however, no sooner heard of the approach of the Greeks than, dismissing the Phoenician ships, they sailed away with the remainder to the mainland. For it had been resolved in council not to risk a battle, since the Persian fleet was thought to be no match for that of the enemy. They fled, therefore, to the main, to be under the protection of their land army, which now lay at Mycale, and consisted of the troops left behind by Xerxes to keep guard over Ionia. This was an army of 60,000 men under the command of Tigranes, a Persian of more than common beauty and stature. The captains resolved, therefore, to betake themselves to these troops for defence, to drag their ships ashore, and to build a rampart around them, which might at once protect the fleet, and serve likewise as a place of refuge for themselves. Having so resolved, the commanders put out to sea, and passing the temple of the Eumenides, arrived at Gyson and Scolopoeus, which are in the territory of Mycale. Here is a temple of Eleusinian Demeter, built by Philistus, the son of Pasicles, who came to Asia with Neleus, the son of Codrus, what time he founded Miletus. At this place they drew the ships up on the beach, and surrounded them with a rampart made of stones and trunks of trees, cutting down for this purpose all the fruit trees which grew near, and defending the barrier by means of stakes firmly planted in the ground. Here they were prepared either to win a battle or undergo a siege, their thoughts embracing both chances. The Greeks, when they understood that the barbarians had fled to the mainland, were sorely vexed at their escape, nor could they determine at first what they should do, whether they should return home or proceed to the Hellespont. In the end, however, they resolved to do neither, but to make sail for the continent. So they made themselves ready for a sea fight by the preparation of boarding bridges and what else was necessary, provided with which they sailed to Mycale. Now when they came to the place where the camp was, they found no one venture out to meet them, but observed the ships all dragged ashore within the barrier, and a strong land force drawn up in battle array upon the beach. Leotychides therefore sailed along the shore in his ship, keeping as close hold to the land as possible, and by the voice of a herald thus addressed the Ionians. Men of Ionia, ye who can hear me speak, do ye take heed to what I say, for the Persians will not understand a word that I utter. When we join battle with them, before aught else, remember freedom, and next recollect our watchword, which is Hebe. If there be any who hear me not, let those who hear report my words to the others. In all this, Leotychides had the very same design which Themistocles entertained at Artemisium. Either the barbarians wouldn't know what he had said, and the Ionians would be persuaded to revolt from them, or if his words were reported to the former, they would mistrust their Greek soldiers. After Leotychides had made this address, the Greeks brought their ships to the land, and having disembarked, arrayed themselves for the battle. When the Persians saw them marshalling their array, and bethought themselves of the advice which had been offered to the Ionians, their first act was to disarm the Samians, whom they suspected of complicity with the enemy. For it had happened lately that a number of the Athenians who lingered in Attica, having been made prisoners by the troops of Xerxes, were brought to Asia on board the barbarian fleet, and these men had been ransomed, one and all, by the Samians, who sent them back to Athens, well furnished with provisions for the way. On this account, as much as on any other, the Samians were suspected as men who had paid the ransom of 500 of the king's enemies. After disarming them, the Persians next dispatched the Milesians to guard the paths which led up into the heights of Mycale, because, they said, the Milesians were well acquainted with that region. Their true object, however, was to remove them to a distance from the camp. In this way the Persians sought to secure themselves against such of the Ionians as they thought likely, if occasion offered, to make rebellion. They then joined shield to shield, and so made themselves a breastwork against the enemy. The Greeks now, having finished their preparations, began to move towards the barbarians, when lo, as they advanced, a rumour flew among the host from one end to the other that the Greeks had fought and conquered the army of Mardonius in Boeotia. At the same time a herald's wand was observed lying upon the beach. Many things prove to me that the gods take part in the affairs of man. How else, when the battles of Mycale and Plataea were about to happen on the self-same day, should such a rumour have reached the Greeks in that region, greatly cheering the whole army, and making them more eager than before to risk their lives? A strange coincidence, too, it was that both the battles should have been fought near a precinct of Eleusinian Demeter. The fight at Plataea took place, as I said before, quite close to one of Demeter's temples, and now the battle at Mycale was to be fought hard by another. Rightly, too, did the rumour run that the Greeks with Pausanias had gained their victory, for the fight at Plataea fell early in the day, whereas that at Mycale was towards evening. That the two battles were really fought on the same day of the same month became apparent when inquiries were made a short time afterwards. Before the rumour reached them, the Greeks were full of fear, not so much on their own account as for their countrymen, and for Greece herself, lest she should be worsted in her struggle with Mardonius. But when the voice fell on them, their fear vanished, and they charged more vigorously and at a quicker pace. So the Greeks and the barbarians rushed with like eagerness to the fray, for the Hellespont and the islands formed the prize for which they were about to fight. The Athenians and the force drawn up with them, who formed one half of the army, marched along the shore, where the country was low and level, but the way for the Lacedaemonians and to the troops with them lay across hills and a torrent course, Hence, while the Lacedaemonians were effecting their passage round, the Athenians on the other wing had already closed with the enemy. So long as the wicker bucklers of the Persians continued standing, they made a stout defence, and hadn't even the worst of the battle. But when the Athenians and the allies with them, wishing to make the victory their own and not share it with the Lacedaemonians, cheered each other on with shouts and attacked them with the utmost fierceness, then at last the face of things became changed. For bursting through the line of shields and rushing forwards in a body, the Greeks fell upon the Persians, who, though they bore the charge and for a long time maintained their ground, yet at length took refuge in their entrenchment. Here the Athenians themselves, together with those who followed them in the line of battle, the Corinthians, the Sicyonians, and the Troezenians, pressed so closely on the steps of their flying foes that they entered along with them into the fortress. And now, when even their fortress was taken, the barbarians no longer offered resistance, but fled hastily away, all save only the Persians. They still continued to fight in knots of a few men against the Greeks, who kept pouring into the entrenchment. And here, while 2 of the Persian commanders fled, 2 fell upon the field. Artaintes and Ithamitres, who were leaders of the fleet, escaped. Mardontes and the commander of the land force, Tigranes, died fighting. The Persians still held out when the Lacedaemonians and their part of the army reached the camp, and joined in the remainder of the battle. The number of Greeks who fell in the struggle here was not small. The Sicyonians especially lost many, and among the rest Perillaius, their general. The Samians, who served with the Medes and who, although disarmed, still remained in the camp, seeing from the very beginning of the fight that the victory was doubtful, did all that lay in their power to render help to the Greeks. And the other Ionians likewise, beholding their example, revolted and attacked the Persians. As for the Milesians, who had been ordered for the better security of the Persians to guard the mountain paths, that in case any accident befell them, such as had now happened, they might not lack guides to conduct them into the high tracts of Mycale, and who had also been removed to hinder them from making an outbreak in the Persian camp. They, instead of obeying their orders, broke them in every respect, for they guided the flying Persians by wrong roads, which brought them into the presence of the enemy. And at last they set upon them with their own hands, and showed themselves the hottest of their adversaries. Ionia, therefore, on this day, revolted a second time from the Persians. In this battle the Greeks who behaved with the greatest bravery were the Athenians, and among them the palm was borne off by Homolocus, the son of Euthenus, a man accomplished in the Pancratium. This Homolocus was afterwards slain in the war between the Athenians and the Carystians. He fell in the fight near Cyrnus in the Carystian territory, and was buried in the neighbourhood of Geraestus. After the Athenians, the most distinguished on the Greek side were the Corinthians, the Troezenians, and the Sicyonians. The Greeks, when they'd slaughtered the greater portion of the barbarians, either in the battle or in the rout, set fire to their ships and burnt them, together with the bulwark which had been raised for their defence, first, however, removing therefrom all the booty and carrying it down to the beach. Besides other plunder, they found here many caskets of money. When they had burnt the rampart and the vessels, the Greeks sailed away to Samos, and there took counsel together concerning the Ionians whom they thought of removing out of Asia. Ionia they proposed to abandon to the barbarians, and their doubt was in what part of their own possessions in Greece they should settle its inhabitants, for it seemed to them a thing impossible that they should be ever on the watch to guard and protect Ionia. And yet otherwise there could be no hope that the Ionians would escape the vengeance of the Persians. Hereupon the Peloponnesian leaders proposed that the seaport towns of such Greeks as had sided with the Medes should be taken away from them and made over to the Ionians. The Athenians, on the other hand, were very unwilling that any removal at all should take place, and misliked the Peloponnesians holding councils concerning their colonists. So, as they set themselves against the change, the Peloponnesians yielded with a good will. Hereupon the Samians, Chians, Lesbians, and other islanders who had helped the Greeks at this time were received into the league of the allies, and took the oaths, binding themselves to be faithful and not desert the common cause. Then the Greeks sailed away to the Hellespont, where they meant to break down the bridges, which they supposed to be still extended across the strait. The barbarians who escaped from the battle, a scanty remnant, took refuge in the heights of Mycale, whence they made good their retreat to Sardis. During the march, Macystes, the son of Darius, who had been present at the disaster, had words with Artaintes the general, on whom he showered many reproaches. He called him, among other things, worse than a woman, for the way in which he had exercised his command, and said there was no punishment which he didn't deserve to suffer for doing the king's house such grievous hurt. Now with the Persians there is no greater insult than to call a man worse than a woman. So when Artaintes had borne the reproaches for some while, at last he fell in a rage, and drew his scimitar upon Macystes, being fain to kill him. But a certain Halicarnassian, Xenagorus by name, the son of Praxilleus, who stood behind Artaintes at the time, seeing him in the act of rushing forward, seized him suddenly round the waist, and lifting him from his feet, dashed him down upon the ground, which gave time for the spearmen who guarded Macystes to come to his aid. By his conduct here, Xenagorus gained the favour not of Macystes only, but likewise of Xerxes himself, whose brother he had preserved from death, and the king rewarded his action by setting him over the whole land of Cilicia. Except this, nothing happened upon the road, and the men continued their march and came all safe to Sardis. At Sardis they found the king, who had been there ever since he lost the sea fight and fled from Athens to Asia. During the time that Xerxes abode at this place, he fell in love with the wife of Macystes, who was likewise staying in the city. He therefore sent her messages, but failed to win her consent, and he could not dare to use violence out of regard to Macystes, his brother. This the woman knew well enough, and hence it was that she had the boldness to resist him. So Xerxes, finding no other way open, devised a marriage between his own son Darius and a daughter of this woman and Macystes, thinking that he might better obtain his ends if he effected this union. Accordingly he betrothed these two persons to one another, and after the usual ceremonies were completed, took his departure for Susa. When he was come there, and had received the woman into his palace as his son's bride, a change came over him, and losing all love for the wife of Macystes, he conceived a passion for his son's bride, Macystes' daughter, and Artainta, for so she was called, very soon returned his love. After a while, the thing was discovered in the way which I'll now relate. Amistris, the wife of Xerxes, had woven with her own hands a long robe of many colours and very curious, which she presented to her husband as a gift. Xerxes, who was greatly pleased with it, forthwith put it on and went in it to visit Artainta, who happened likewise on this day to please him greatly. He therefore bade her ask him whatever boon she liked, and promised that whatever it was he would assuredly grant her request. Then Artainta, who was doomed to suffer calamity together with her whole house, said to him, "Wilt thou indeed give me whatever I like to ask?" So the king, suspecting nothing less than that her choice would fall where it did, pledged his word and swore to her. She then, as soon as she heard his oath, asked boldly for the robe. Hereupon Xerxes tried all possible means to avoid the gift, not that he grudged to give it, but because he dreaded Amistris, who already suspected and would now, he feared, detect his love. So he offered her cities instead, and heaps of gold, and an army which should obey no other leader. The last of these is a thoroughly Persian gift. But as nothing could prevail on Artainta to change her mind, at the last he gave her the robe. Then Artainta was very greatly rejoiced, and she often wore the garment and was proud of it. And so it came to the ears of Amistris that the robe had been given to her. Now when Amistris learnt the whole matter, she felt no anger against Artainta, but looking upon her mother, the wife of Mecistes, as the cause of all the mischief, she determined to compass her death. She waited therefore till her husband gave the great royal banquet, a feast which takes place once every year, in celebration of the king's birthday. Tikta, the feast is called, in the Persian tongue, which in our language may be rendered perfect. And this is the only day in all the year on which the king soaps his head, and distributes gifts to the Persians. Amistris waited accordingly for this day, and then made request of Xerxes that he would please to give her, as her present, the wife of Mecistes. But he refused, for it seemed to him shocking and monstrous to give into the power of another a woman who was not only his brother's wife, but was likewise wholly guiltless of what had happened, the more especially as he knew well enough with what intent Amistris had preferred her request. At length, however, wearied by her importunity, and constrained moreover by the law of the feast, which required that no one who asked a boon that day at the king's board should be denied his request, he yielded, but with a very ill will, and gave the woman into her power. Having so done, and told Amistris she might deal with her as she chose, the king called his brother into his presence, and said, Mecistes, thou art my brother, the son of my father Darius, and what is more, thou art a good man. I pray thee, live no longer with the wife whom thou now hast. Behold, I will give thee instead my own daughter in marriage. Take her to live with thee. But part first with the wife thou now hast. I like not that thou keep to her. To this Mecistes, greatly astonished, answered, My lord and master, how strange a speech hast thou uttered! Thou biddest me put away my wife, who hast borne me 3 goodly youths, and daughters besides, whereof thou hast taken one, and espoused her to a son of thine own. Thou biddest me put away this wife, notwithstanding that she pleases me greatly, and marry a daughter of thine? In truth, O king, that I am accounted worthy to wed thy daughter is an honour which I mightily esteem, but yet to do as thou sayest am I in no wise willing. I pray thee, use not force to compel me to yield to thy prayer. And be sure thy daughter will find a husband to the full as worthy as myself. Suffer me then to live on with my own wife. Thus did Mecistes answer, and Xerxes in wrath replied, I will tell thee, Mecistes, what thou hast gained by these words. I will not give thee my daughter, nor shalt thou live any longer with thy own wife. So mayest thou learn in time to come to take what is offered thee. Mecistes, when he heard this, withdrew, only saying, Master, thou hast not yet taken my life. While these things were passing between Xerxes and his brother Mecistes, Amistris sent for the spearmen of the royal bodyguard, and caused the wife of Mecistes to be mutilated in a horrible fashion. Her 2 breasts, her nose, ears, and lips were cut off and thrown to the dogs. Her tongue was torn out by the roots, and thus disfigured she was sent back to her home. Mecistes, who knew nothing of what had happened, but was fearful that some calamity had befallen him, ran hastily to his house. There, finding his wife so savagely used, he forthwith took counsel with his sons, and accompanied by them and certain others also, set forth on his way to Bactria, intending to stir up a revolt in that province, and hoping to do great hurt to Xerxes, all which I believe he would have accomplished if he had once reached the Bactrian and Sacan people, for he was greatly beloved by them both, and was, moreover, satrap of Bactria. But Xerxes, hearing of his designs, sent an armed force upon his track, and slew him while he was still upon the road, with his sons and his whole army. Such is the tale of King Xerxes' love, and of the death of his brother Mecistes. Meanwhile, the Greeks, who had left Mycale and sailed for the Hellespont, were forced by contrary winds to anchor near Lectum, from which place they afterwards sailed on to Abydos. On arriving here, they discovered that the bridges which they had thought to find standing, and which had been the chief cause of their proceeding to the Hellespont, were already broken up and destroyed. Upon this discovery, Leotychides and the Peloponnesians under him were anxious to sail back to Greece, but the Athenians, with Xanthippus their captain, thought good to remain, and resolved to make an attempt upon the Chersonese. So while the Peloponnesians sailed away to their homes, the Athenians crossed over from Abydos to the Chersonese, and there laid siege to Sestos. Now, as Sestos was the strongest fortress in all that region, the rumour had no sooner gone forth that the Greeks were arrived at the Hellespont than great numbers flocked thither from all the towns in the neighbourhood. Among the rest there came a certain Oyabadzas, a Persian from the city of Cardia, where he had laid up the shore cables which had been used in the construction of the bridges. The town was guarded by its own Aeolian inhabitants, but contained also some Persians and a great multitude of their allies. The whole district was under the rule of Artaictes, one of the king's satraps, who was a Persian, but a wicked and cruel man. At the time when Xerxes was marching against Athens, he had craftily possessed himself of the treasures belonging to Protesilaus, the son of Iphiclus, which were at Elias in the Chersonese. For at this place is the tomb of Protesilaus, surrounded by a sacred precinct, and here there was great store of wealth, vases of gold and silver, works in brass, garments, and other offerings, all which Artaictes made his prey, having got the king's consent by thus cunningly addressing him, Master, there is in this region the house of a Greek who, when he attacked thy territory, met his due reward and perished. Give me his house, I pray thee, that hereafter men may fear to carry arms against thy land. By these words he easily persuaded Xerxes to give him the man's house, for there was no suspicion of his design in the king's mind. And he could say, in a certain sense, that Protesilaus had borne arms against the land of the king, because the Persians consider all Asia to belong to them, and to their king for the time being. So when Xerxes allowed his request, he brought all the treasures from Elias to Sestos, and made the sacred land into cornfields and pasture grounds. Nay more, whenever he paid a visit to Elias, he polluted the shrine itself by having intercourse with women within the inner sanctuary. It was this Artaictes who was now besieged by the Athenians, and he was but ill prepared for defence, since the Greeks had fallen upon him quite unawares, nor had he in the least expected their coming. When it was now late in the autumn, and the siege still continued, the Athenians began to murmur that they were kept abroad so long, and seeing that they weren't able to take the place, besought their captains to lead them back to their own country. But the captains refused to move, till either the city had fallen, or the Athenian people ordered them to return home. So the soldiers patiently bore up against their sufferings. Meanwhile, those within the walls were reduced to the last straits, and forced even to boil the very thongs of their beds for food. At last, when these too failed them, Artaictes and Oyabadzas, with the native Persians, fled away from the place by night, having let themselves down from the wall at the back of the town, where the blockading force was scantiest. As soon as day dawned, they of the Chersonese made signals to the Greeks from the walls, and let them know what had happened, at the same time throwing open the gates of their city. Hereupon, while some of the Greeks entered the town, others, and those the more numerous body, set out in pursuit of the enemy. Oyabadzas fled into Thrace, but there the Absinthian Thracians seized him, and offered him, after their wonted fashion, to Pleistorus, one of the gods of their country. His companions they likewise put to death, but in a different manner. As for Artaictes and the troops with him, who had been the last to leave the town, they were overtaken by the Greeks not far from Aegospotami, and defended themselves stoutly for a time, but were at last either killed or taken prisoners. Those whom they made prisoners the Greeks bound with chains, and brought with them to Sestos. Artaictes and his son were among the number. Now the Chersonesides relate that the following prodigy befell one of the Greeks who guarded the captives. He was broiling upon a fire some salted fish, when of a sudden they began to leap and quiver, as if they had been only just caught. Hereat the rest of the guards hurried round to look, and were greatly amazed at the sight. Artaictes, however, beholding the prodigy, called the man to him, and said, Fear not, Athenian stranger, because of this marvel. It has not appeared on thy account, but on mine. Protesilaus of Elias has sent it to show me that, albeit he is dead and embalmed with salt, he has power from the gods to chastise his injurer. Now then I would fain acquit my debt to him thus. For the riches which I took from his temple I will fix my fine at 100 talents, while for myself and this boy of mine I will give the Athenians 200 talents, on condition that they will spare our lives. Such were the promises of Artaictes, but they failed to persuade Xanthippus. For the men of Elias who wished to avenge Protesilaus entreated that he might be put to death, and Xanthippus himself was of the same mind. So they led Artaictes to the tongue of land where the bridges of Xerxes had been fixed, or according to others to the knoll above the town of Maditas, and having nailed him to a board, they left him hanging thereupon. As for the son of Artaictes, him they stoned to death before his eyes. This done, they sailed back to Greece, carrying with them, besides other treasures, the shore cables from the bridges of Xerxes, which they wished to dedicate in their temples. And this was all that took place that year. It was the grandfather of this Artaictes, one Artembares by name, who suggested to the Persians a proposal which they readily embraced, and thus urged upon Cyrus. Since Zeus, they said, has overthrown Astyages and given the rule to the Persians and to thee chiefly, O Cyrus, come now, let's quit this land wherein we dwell, for it's a scant land and a rugged, and let's choose ourselves some other better country. Many such lie around us, some nearer, some further off. If we take one of these, men will admire us far more than they do now. Who that had the power would not so act? And when shall we have a fairer time than now, when we are lords of so many nations and rule all Asia? Then Cyrus, who didn't greatly esteem the council, told them they might do so if they liked, but he warned them not to expect in that case to continue rulers, but to prepare for being ruled by others. Soft countries gave birth to soft men. There was no region which produced very delightful fruits, and at the same time men of a warlike spirit. So the Persians departed with altered minds, confessing that Cyrus was wiser than they, and chose rather to dwell in a churlish land, and exercise lordship, than to cultivate plains, and be the slaves of others. This concludes the reading of the Histories of Herodotus. Herodotus wrote his history of the Persian invasions of Greece in the 5th century BC. He was born in Halicarnassus, in what is now western Turkey, and lived in Athens. He's celebrated as the father of historiography. The Histories of Herodotus was produced in 1998 by Blackstone Audio Books Incorporated, which holds the copyright thereto. Neither this recording nor any portion of it may be reproduced or used for any purpose without prior written authorization from Blackstone Audio Books. The book was read by Bernard Mays. If you'd like to obtain a mail order catalogue or additional information about our growing line of audio books, write Blackstone Audio Books, Post Office Box 969, Ashland, Oregon, zip code 97520, or call 1-800-SAY-BOOK. That's 1-800-729-2665.